Jason Belzer here for Athletic Director U at the 2017 NCAA Convention. I am joined by Daniel Parker of Parker Executive Search and Jamie Pollard from Iowa State University. And we're going to discuss coaching searches. So, you have completed a number of searches under your tenure at Iowa State. What's that process like? Let's start from the very beginning, the preparation of knowing that maybe one day you're going to have a coach leave or maybe you're going to have to make a change. What are you thinking of today to make sure that process is as efficient as possible when the time comes for it?
Well, I would say first and foremost, as an athletics director, probably one of the most, if not the most important thing I'm responsible for is hiring coaches, because they have such a direct impact on our student athletes. So I would say, the overlying piece to that question is recognizing and respecting how important that process will be if and when you get involved into it. Then the second part is probably just being able to really understand your landscape and know, not only what you're going to look for, but what probably would fit best at your institution, because just because Coach A is successful somewhere else doesn't mean they'll be successful at every place. So really having a really good understanding of who you are, so that when you get into that process, you're able to filter quicker, because they'll be coming at you, left and right, and trying to be able to stay committed to what those values are. And then, you never want to be in that process. Hopefully all your coaches are successful, but being able to stay contemporary to who's out there. Yeah. And, not only who's out there successfully, but who's out there and is movable, because that is a big part of any time you go into this. So always being able, people, the over kind of cliche that you've got the shortlist.
Sure.
And I think that is probably a cliche. I mean, I do think.
So you don't keep a short list, or?
No, I don't keep a short list per se. I think you're just always in that process of just, again, respecting how important it is to have the right coaches, respecting the fact that that if you're in that you need to do a really good job with it. And so staying abreast of what's going on in your industry, who's doing what. But, to say, well, you got a short list today, yeah, there's people you watch, but that short list can change daily based on information you get.
Yeah,
sure. Daniel?
Yeah, I would just add to that. When we got into this business and started conducting coach searches, that was something we always heard, was every AD has a short list in their desk drawer. And the question we used to ask is, well, what happens when you can't hire anybody on that short list? So you got 3 or 4 names, and maybe the compensation, they're already making too much money, or maybe they're in other searches. So we started expanding those short lists and really saying, why don't you see more than less? If you're Jamie and you're at Iowa State, there may be only 5 guys in the country that really fit. But if you're at a mid-major, there might be 50 guys that really fit your opportunity. Plus, there might be 10 other searches that are going on at the same time. So we always like to give our clients choices. Jamie knows you sit down, go through a database, and you look at a lot of options. We really believe in seeing diversity. And really at the end of the process, sometimes an AD goes in saying, I really want type A of coach, and they end up going an entirely different direction. So every search is completely different. And that's why what Jamie's talking about is a big part of that, is having a plan before you decide to make that decision. If you wait till the end of the season and you fire that coach and you have no plan, that's when the chaos really starts. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that.
So I'd like to actually hit upon that. We've had this conversation that you said that a lot of times, a lot of athletic directors, I think, are unprepared. They have so much going on in their departments that sometimes they're blindsided by a new search, and they haven't been thinking about potentially doing that. What can an AD do to be more prepared, and what are some of the common mistakes that you see an athletic director do when the search process starts?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of preparation that goes into the search that maybe an athletic director who hasn't been through it before is not expecting. These ADs are under enormous amounts of pressure. When you make that tough decision to let your coach go, there's so many people reaching out at you. I mean, Jamie can tell you, your cell phone fills up really quickly from agents, from fans, from boosters, from alums, from all these different people really coming at you. So if you can and have some time to really start thinking about what does my coaching profile look like, I think that's a great place to start, to really do an in-depth study of what works, what does not work in my institution, because Jamie's right. Not every coach is a good fit at each institution. So really looking at your league, looking at compensation studies and surveys, looking at your assistant coaches, looking at your recruiting budgets, really knowing everything that goes into what makes a successful head coach at your institution. What works in your league, what doesn't work in your league. So knowing that all before you have to make that tough decision will help you be prepared when you start looking at and making that short list of coaches.
Sure. How do you deal with that? I mean, you're bombarded, right? You're bombarded by the agents, the boosters, your friend's wife's cousin who has a recommendation for a new basketball coach. How do you make sure that you are doing what you have to do, but also listening to your constituents and making them feel like they actually may have a voice or at least being listened to?
Well, I would say there's two parts to it to me. So the first part of that is in that plan development, long before you have the search, is prepping those that are going to be involved in the process. So knowing who the decision makers are and who the influencers are. For example, how is your president going to react? How are the board of regents going to react? So that you can get the deck stacked for the plan.
Right.
Because once it starts, it's too late to be doing that. That's where, in those searches, and we haven't always used a search firm, we've used it the majority of the time, but that's when it switches for me, because then the execution of the plan is where I go to the search firm and I say, help us execute that plan, because I don't want any of my energies spent at that point on the plan. I want my energies and focused on the candidates, because now I'm really in it. I'm evaluating you as a candidate and trying to figure out, are you the right fit? And if I'm spending time at that time also over here trying to get the plan set up or the logistics, then I'm really spending my energies and focus on the wrong things. And that's where, what I've learned through the process of, 12 years of doing this, that make sure your energies and focus is on the right thing, not the wrong things.
So, two questions for you. One, how do you know what fit is? I mean, what is fit at Iowa State? And two, have you ever made a mistake during a search, or is there anything that you can look back and say, I probably should have been better prepared in some sort of situation to have addressed this, or maybe I didn't think about this maybe earlier on in your tenure?
I don't know if I'd classify them as mistakes as saying that we're always learning. And so, what I thought about the process, when I first became athletic director versus what I think about the process today is vastly different. So when I first started into the process, you feel comfortable with the fact that, okay, you got to where you're at because you make the right decisions. So you think you can, use that process and just, I'm going to be smarter than the other schools and I'm going to figure out who the right person is at Iowa State. And over time, through trial and error, you learn maybe that, one of the things I love to say is everybody wants to win. Everybody will say, well, we need to find somebody who can win. Well, name me somebody that hires somebody that goes,
Sure.
Well, they're a great person, but they have no chance to win here. No, we all think they're going to win, right? So when you accept that and say they're all not going to win, now what are we really looking for?
Right.
Okay? And so this may sound like you're looking at it through the wrong end of the lens, a negative way, but I always like to say, okay, if they're not successful, or when they hit adversity, what are they going to be like? Are they going to fit here when we go through those tough patches? And so that's a big thing that I'm looking for, because I'm looking for what's their personality. How are they really interacting with people? Do they understand at Iowa State what we're not and what we are? When we did our most recent basketball search, because of Coach Hoiberg's situation with the NBA and it getting extended out. We had a lot of time to do some of the planning, but even further to drill down on candidates. And one of the things we did, which I've shared with many ADs now, that I never would have thought of, is we talked to supervisor basketball officials and we talked to some basketball officials. Because to me, the personality of who we hired was really important. Didn't want to scream or didn't want to, person that was, a ranting rager. It was because of who we were at that time under Coach Hoiberg. And so talking to officials was really interesting to get insights that I would have never thought to 10 years ago.
Sure.
So I don't know if that was a mistake 10 years ago because I didn't even know it, but I learned, what information is probably really important and where you can go get that information.
I'll just add to that, thinking about your two most recent searches. I think that's great examples of how these searches are all different. So when we're working on the football search, it happened during the normal time period, and everybody else was looking for a football coach at the same time. So we were in a lot of competition for Matt Campbell, for these really hot coaches. The basketball search just happened to be in June when we were the only ones in the marketplace looking for a coach. So we had a lot more time to talk to those basketball officials or talk to a lot of other coaches and a lot of other administrators and really making sure we were seeing that right pool of candidates. So those two searches were completely different based on the time periods and when they were conducted, but both very thorough in their own right. So the football search, even though it happened at the end of the season and there was a lot of other searches going on at the same time, Jamie made a lot of phone calls. He really did a lot of homework and a lot of research to make sure he was getting that right fit for his institution. Because ultimately, I think he said something earlier, hiring these coaches, especially your revenue coaches, is the most important thing you do.
Sure. So how often do you have a situation where you are been retained to run a search and you walk in and the athletic department, the institution does not have a good idea what fit really means there, or maybe they have expectations or maybe even delusions about the type of candidate that they can get?
Yeah, it happens. And I would say fit maybe changes through the course of the search. And sometimes, a mistake is going into a process already falling in love with a candidate. And you may go in as an athletic director and say, I've been watching this coach all season. I think they're going to be the perfect fit at my institution. And then you get them in the room with your president or chancellor and maybe a board member, and you say, yeah, maybe they weren't the right fit. So where do I go from there? So something I always advise athletic directors is don't fall in love. Let's see more than less. Let's have your short list, but let's also have an extended list so you have some choices. Because at the end of the day, the candidate you fall in love with, we may not be able to close on their compensation or things may fall apart at the end. So have choices as you go through the process. Because at the end, you got to hire a coach.
I would also add something to the question you asked a little earlier about, so what are the mistakes or what things you've learned? My personality is such that I'm a get back to people, and searches fly in the face of that.
Right.
And I've learned that the hard way through that process, because early on, you felt like you needed to respond to people, and I watched people use that against me. Because they would say, well, yeah, the next thing I'd hear is, well, yeah, I spoke to him. Well, yeah, was that me just returning a call because you called my office and I was telling you, well, we're using Parker? Well, they're not lying by saying
Right.
they spoke to me.
So you're saying people that potentially maybe use that for their own leverage or their own...
Yes.
Sure.
And so, what I do now, and Daniel knows this well, is, again, once you've lined up your process and you have your plan so that those people that, your president, your board, understand what's going to happen, then that execution, and in my world, I go into the bunker.
Right.
And the only person that's going to have any interaction with an agent or the candidate other than me in the room is going to be them.
Right.
There'll never be anybody that'll say, well, Jamie called me back, or if they call my office or they send me something, it's going to them, and I trust them to reach out and make that overture. But I can say it wasn't me. I was not in, because I don't want to compromise. Your A candidate doesn't need to all of a sudden think they were the B or C candidate
Right.
because some agent is out there chirping.
Right. Do you think that is one of the core values of retaining a search firm? Why use a search firm? You say sometimes you have used and sometimes you haven't.
Well, it goes back to what every search is different, but to me, what they are really good at is that's what they do for a business.
Right.
And so the logistics, the being able to make all the potential candidates feel special, to be able to manage that process and deal with the personalities of the agents, to know who maybe just is trying to get a raise back at their home site or who maybe has sincerely interest, to be able to know, well, did this candidate meet with somebody else before and how did that go? That's invaluable for me. But again, it's taking all that busy work off my plate so that I can zero in on what really matters, which is figuring out who's the best person and not get caught up in all the other clutter. That's what I've found them to be invaluable in doing.
Understanding that marketplace, it changes so rapidly. We conducted some football coach searches this past December. One school, they lost their coach. We had worked with them 3 years ago, and they lost their coach to another opportunity. And just in those 3 short years, how quickly the market had changed from compensation to assistant coach salaries to recruiting budgets. And the athletic director, when we started the search, went back to the search from 3 years ago and looked at all that data. And I said, no, it's changed so much. So let me tell you how it's different. Let me tell you what we're looking at this time. We ended up looking at head coaches from a different level this time, where 3 years before we were looking at assistant coaches from an FBS type of institution. So we're in it every year. We're doing it 12 months a year. We may work on 5 or 6 football coach searches and 5 or 6 basketball coach searches, but it's a 12-month-a-year business for us because we're constantly talking to coaches throughout the year to get that data, to learn, have relationships with those agents. So we know who's looking. We know who's just looking for a pay raise. We can really give Jamie that data. At the end of the day, we do not make the selection. We do not make the hire. That's Jamie and the athletic director's decision. Our job is to recruit, advise, and facilitate the process, to give him a lot of information to help him not make a mistake.
And so back to the question of, well, when do you and when didn't you? So when we hired Coach Hoiberg, who was an alum, and
Sure.
What that process entailed was we knew we wanted to vet Coach Hoiberg and whether he would be our guy. And if he wasn't, then I was going to start the search. But I didn't need the search firm to go help me make that connection. I mean, that was just a natural connection because he was alum and I knew
Right.
him really well. Now, when I switch it back to our football search most recently, Matt Campbell was our candidate A. That was the person we definitely really wanted to give the first opportunity. Now, we could have went and met with him and it didn't go well. But because of what was happening in the marketplace at that time, in hindsight, yes, because Matt said yes and we really connected, we probably could have done that without anybody in that process. But had he not connected with us, or we didn't think he was the candidate, I would have been left high and dry. Sure. So Parker was able to, had everything set up. We were rolling. Sunday we had 6 interviews scheduled. It just, we were able to get the process done on that Saturday, and that was probably a really unique outcome that it went that way. But I would have never gone into that process and left the institution exposed where, on Saturday night it doesn't turn out, and then I'm going, now what are we going to do?
And Matt was a really hot coach.
Right.
He was being courted by a lot of athletic directors in schools at that time. So we had to move quickly, and we had to get Jamie in front of him as quickly as possible so that we could land that A candidate that Jamie wanted.
So you speak about this hot coach, right? That this everyone wants him because he's been successful. How do you, in that situation, and Jamie says, this is our candidate A, did you ever have a situation like that where you say, maybe this person isn't the right fit, or maybe everyone thinks he's hot, but I think you need to take a step back and interview more people? And does it make sense to do that? I mean, yes, you wanted him, but did it make sense to go and interview 3 or 4 more candidates so that you at least had some perspective on?
Well, and the answer to your question is absolutely. But you also have to, as we say, every search is different. Every interview is different too.
Sure.
And so in that process, if we define hot by, okay, he had been successful, but we had done our homework, had watched video, had talked to people, and we had done extensive research to know this is probably going to be a really good fit for us. is he going to want to come to Iowa State, or is he going to want to go explore his other options? Because he was going to have a lot of options.
Sure.
And so what we felt and what they really helped us do is we put ourselves in a position by, camping out 2 blocks from his house the night before his game. I mean, we were in a spot that he was going to feel like we really, really wanted him. And so that process unfolded in the interview in a very unique way that it was like, okay, we're here now. I remember ending the first part of the interview by saying, I can either get up and leave and go interview 6 other people tomorrow, or we can stop the process and shake hands and you're our coach and we're going to spend the next 5 hours putting the deal together.
Sure, yeah.
But that was a very unique situation. And even in that process, they were still very, very helpful in making sure we still protected the entity of Iowa State, because you don't want to do that. Once I cancel the interviews on Sunday, Saturday night, you can't come up short.
Yeah, and remember too, Jamie and Iowa State are getting ready to make a real big financial decision. They're looking to hire a coach for 2 or 3 million times 5 or 6 years. So this is a huge investment. There's a lot of pressure on these athletic directors to get it right. So why not have a consultant? Why not have somebody that's there to really guide you and help you through this process before you make this big investment? Before you buy a house, you might use a real estate
Right.
agent. Before you're about to invest in a coach for $3 million a year times 6 years, that's a lot of money. You ought to have somebody. They don't have a lot of people they can talk to when they go into that bunker, and it's a real confidential process. They need somebody that's there with them in that bunker that can guide them through this process so that they have a great outcome, that everybody is excited when you go to that podium and your fan base and your cheerleaders and everybody is there and really, really pumped up about the decision.
Talk about attracting candidates, impressive candidates. I mean, you're a unique school in a unique location. You play in a fantastic league that's incredibly competitive, particularly on the football side. And so you have a coach that has their whole career ahead of them. They're going to go into a league where they're going to be playing, Oklahoma every year and Texas every year. And, there are certain expectations. How do you convince a coach that this is the place that they can be successful and be there for a long time, or maybe it's be there for a certain time and move on somewhere else eventually?
Well, I can only speak to how I've done it, and we clearly don't have a monopoly on that process.
Sure.
So for me, at a place like Iowa State, it is figuring out what I know our assets are, because we certainly have some liabilities. And so when I look at our assets that I think coaches are attracted to, is the process streamlined? Who's going to be the decision makers? Am I taking a job that there's going to be a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of people trying to tell me what to do? Am I going to have the flexibility to do what I need to do? And that's where, knowing on the front end, when I talked about earlier of saying having that process planned out, being able to be in front of a coach like Matt Campbell and having a president that, although would love to be there in the moment, physically just, he wasn't going to be there, but to have the autonomy that I could get the deal to that level and get it done without having to say, well, now we're going to have to bring you back through this process because this is how our bureaucracy works. That doesn't happen everywhere. So at Iowa State, we're really nimble, and that's a big asset for us. And so we've used that throughout our coaching searches, because we've had presidents, both Dr. Leith and Dr. Joffrey before that understood that we needed to do that, because that was something that could make Iowa State different and better. Likewise, having somebody like Parker and Associates with you, knowing that our relationship and our history together, that I feel like when they take on a search for us, it's not just a transaction, it's almost a calling. And so they're not taking on 10, they're taking on 5. They're not going to, be in this where they've got one candidate that's meeting all 5 places. I mean, they help us keep it special for those candidates, and I appreciate that, and that's one of the reasons we've used them.
I think what's important too for athletic directors to understand that they're getting ready to start a search is Jamie always has great alignment with his president, with his board, so that when he's starting this search, his president, the board, they all understand they're all going in the same direction. Sometimes you see that where maybe the AD and the president and the board are not all aligned the same way on which way this search needs to go. So something critically important to a successful search, that the athletic director has their president, has their board, has those key decision makers all aligned together on how the process is going to look.
Sure. So, he mentioned you run multiple searches at the same time sometimes, and you may have similar institutions. How are you balancing that? A lot of times the same pool of candidates. Occasionally, maybe some people are interviewing for a similar position. How are you managing that?
Well, what we won't do, and we always believe in transparency, so we always tell our clients if we're working on other searches. I think that's critically important. We won't take searches that are in direct conflict. So if I'm working with Jamie, a search in conflict would be another Power 5 search, especially one that's in his conference. We're not going to take that on. We would take it on once we're done with the search for Jamie, but now we're starting to work at all levels. So I may be working with Iowa State, and I may be working with Elon, and I may be working with a Division II institution at the same time. So we have a team that's used to working with a lot of different searches at a time, but we're not going to take searches where the pool is the same and just move them around. We don't have a stable of candidates, and I think that's critically important for our athletic directors, because what they're asking for us is to give them diversity of styles of play, of different individuals from all around the country, and working at all the different levels. I think we can really provide that better for our clients.
Well, gentlemen, I think this was a very enlightening discussion. I thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.